And for our last story here on this week's Rolling Stone, we have to go to the University of California, Santa Barbara, where a PhD candidate, a woman named Laura Tanner, is receiving a huge amount of backlash for the crime of being transphobic. Now, just as a little bit of background, Laura Tanner, like I said, she's a PhD student in feminist studies, no less, She is she's getting her PhD in feminist studies, So, hardcore feminist. She is also an ally of the LGBT community. Hey, what's going on, gang? This is Nate on the Stone. Welcome back to my channel, and welcome to the 15th episode of the Rolling Stone. If you've subscribed to the channel, or if you've been around here before, you know that these Friday videos are a little different from the ones that I upload every Tuesday. There are very few cuts or clips in these Friday videos. They are more single-shot videos where I give my initial thoughts and opinions about stories that are currently in the news. And boy, we've got some doozies this time around. The big story, of course, is that the left is dancing a victory dance because they believe, their narrative right now is that they have proof positive that Trump, his administration, and all of his supporters are out and out racists. They always have been. They are just proudly wearing it on their sleeves now. The proof for this comes from a series of 3 tweets that Trump sent out on Sunday, July 14th, Bastille Day, if you're French or if you're a history nerd. And in these series of tweets, this is what Trump said. He said, quote, "So interesting to see progressive Democrat congresswomen who originally come from countries whose governments are a complete and total catastrophe, the worst, most corrupt and inept anywhere in the world, if they even have a functioning government at all, now loudly and viciously telling the people of the United States, the greatest and most powerful nation on earth, how our government is to be run. Why don't they go back and help fix the totally broken and crime-infested places from which they came? Then come back and show us how it's done. These places need your help badly. You can't leave fast enough. I'm sure that Nancy Pelosi would be very happy to quickly work out free travel arrangements," unquote. These tweets are being used as the proof positive that Trump is a racist. And it all hinges on where he says, why don't they go back and help fix the totally broken and crime-infested places from which they came? Why don't they go back? Which everyone is saying is just a slight, realigning of the old racist phrase, go back to where you came from, right? When people didn't want immigrants coming to America, they would say, go back to where you came from, right? They're saying that this is basically, the offspring of that racist statement, and therefore Trump using it shows that he's a racist. And this has been the opinion of the left. The left has solidified around this. So, for example, NPR ran a headline, "Go back where you came from, the long rhetorical roots of Trump's racist tweets." Or CBS said, "U.S. Equal Opportunity Commission specifically lists go back to where you came from as an example of discrimination." And we've seen this, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, AOC, Ilhan Omar, Rashid Tlaib, Ariasa Presley, Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, Beto O'Rourke, pretty much anyone who is anyone on the left, anyone who is a progressive, anyone who is an ideologue has taken this standard and just run with it full steam ahead. And this really all came to a head on Wednesday, the 17th. Trump had a Make America Great Again rally in Greenville, North Carolina. And the crowds there at that rally chanted, send her back, which was obviously a recalling of the old chant, lock her up, which was directed against Hillary Clinton in the 2016 campaign. And if at all possible, the left lost their minds even more about that than about the original tweets. On Twitter, Sean King said that seeing those people chant "send her back" was the single most racist thing he had seen in American politics in a good long time. Chuck Schumer just went out and out and said that this sort of thing is what you see in dictatorships. Now, here's a couple of things. First of all, we're not living under a dictatorship. I'm sorry if you were, hoping that we were for whatever reason, but we aren't. And the proof of that comes from this. If we were actually living in a dictatorship, do you think that the media, the entertainment industry, and the progressives in Congress, like AOC and Ilhan Omar, do you think that they would have been able to criticize, insult, and basically just hammer on Trump, his administration, his ideas, his policies, and his supporters like they have since 2016? Do you honestly think that a dictatorship would allow AOC, Ilhan Omar, Ariasa Presley, and Rashid Tlaib to actually have a joint press conference the day after these tweets went public to basically say, you're a racist, you're a sexist, you're afraid of us, we are going to beat you, and we are your enemy, and we're coming for you? Do you really think that a dictatorship would allow that sort of opposition to, first of all, spring up, and then actually just to grow and flourish? No. It would have to be the stupidest regime in the world, okay? And it would have to be the stupidest regime in the world to do that, okay? So, no. The very fact that people can come out and say that this is proof that we're living in a dictatorship is actually proof that we're not living in a dictatorship. Now, are these tweets racist? Again, no. Trump didn't mention any names. He didn't mention any countries of origin. A lot of people assumed that he was talking about Ilhan Omar, who comes originally from Somalia, and Rashid Tlaib, who originally comes from Palestine. Okay? But again, I think that everyone can agree that these tweets could have been much more, could have been worded much better. I think that everyone can agree that these tweets are not very well phrased. And that seems to be the consensus on the right, that they are very poorly phrased. Like, we can see the message Trump is trying to make, which is basically, if you don't like the United States, if you don't love America, if it actually is if it actually is a dictatorial, racist, xenophobic, homophobic, rich-loving, poor-squashing country that it is, that oppresses women minorities, just to be on the safe side, if it's really like that, okay, if you really honestly believe it and you don't love your country, why are you staying? You're free to move. Please, go, be happy, find happiness somewhere else. That's the message that he was trying to get out. But again, it's very, very poorly phrased. But again, since he didn't mention names, he didn't mention countries of origin, it's not racist. That was obviously a blanket statement that he was giving to everyone who, doesn't love the United States, but who still lives here. Now, two more things about this, now that we have that out of the way. First of all, and especially Sean King's statement that this is the most racist thing that he's ever seen in a good long time, and Chuck Schumer saying that this is proof that we're in a dictatorship. This is how you get more people like James Hodgkinson's, who was the shooter in 2017 during the House of Representatives charity baseball game where Representative Steve Scalise was actually shot. This is how you get more people like him. This is how you get more people like Willem van Schropens, who is the man who was attacking an ICE facility center with a rifle and Molotov cocktails in Tacoma, Washington. And he was actually shot dead, when the police actually finally responded, when the police responded to him. This is how you get more people like this, okay? Because the left keeps saying that everyone who supports Trump, pretty much everyone who isn't part of them, you're dictators, you're racists, you're homophobes, you're xenophobes, basically you're the reincarnation of Nazis. Well, you start hearing that, every day, day in and day out. Eventually, the thing that you start to think is that the only way to take out these Nazis is through violent force. Oh my God, if the American electorate, and if the American system has failed so much that we are actually witnessing a Nazi in the White House, then the only thing that can take him down is physical violence, because obviously you can't trust the people or the system, because they're the two things that sent him there in the first place. So by Schumer and Sean King and everyone else on the left repeating these grandiose lies about it being racist, about it being dictatorial, they are sowing the ground for more violence. Okay? They are sowing the seeds for more violence. Violence that I can only assume they agree with, because I never really see any condemnations for this sort of violence. They might give like a general platitude about how we have to come together, violence isn't the answer, but they will not specifically come down and condemn a particular shooter or a particular act of violence that comes from a member of their team, from someone who actually follows their ideology and their philosophy. You never see that. So, by continuing this rhetoric, by basically throwing red meat to their base, they are sowing the seeds for more violence, for more people to very potentially get hurt at the very least, or to actually be killed at worst. So there's that. But also, before we move on to the next story, I just want to give a word of advice to people on the right, and especially those who are supporting Trump. Do not make lock her up, okay? Do not make lock her up the chant for the 2019 campaign. I know, I'm as nostalgic as the next guy, and we all really want to recreate the 2016 election because it was such a great election cycle in hindsight, but we can't, okay? Lock her up, that worked in 2016. First, because Hillary Clinton wasn't a very likable or liked candidate. Second of all, because lock her up really fit her, because there was a lot of shady things in her past that she had never been held to account for. Benghazi, the Uranium One scandal, all the other shady deals that the Clinton Foundation were more than likely engaged in. The fact that she more than likely helped cover up her husband, Bill Clinton, sexually molesting and in some cases actually raping women so that his political career, and by extension her political career, would not be killed prematurely. So it worked there. It's not going to work here in 2019, primarily because Hillary Clinton isn't running. Okay? Say what you want about the squad, AOC, Ilhan Omar, and the rest, but they are young, they are passionate, and they're not idiots, okay? They may be ignorant, but they're not idiots. They know how to get people on their side. They know how to weave a narrative. So, find another chant. Please, just find another chant. And especially since Trump is actually distancing himself from the crowd that was actually chanting that, I think that that's a very good indication that we need something a bit more deeper, and something that's a bit more unifying for the country for the 2020 election. Our second story has to do with the 50th anniversary of the moon landing. Yes, this Saturday, July 20th, it's the 50th anniversary of Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landing on and walking on the moon. Great day in American history, just a fantastic day in human history itself. And for that 50th anniversary, the New York Times is running a lot of stories about the Apollo mission, about the space race, etc. Well, Mary Robinette Kowal, she contributed to this series with a piece in the New York Times, which was headlined, quote, "To make it to the moon, women have to escape Earth's gender bias." Okay, I'm going to repeat that. To make it to the moon, women have to escape Earth's gender bias. And really, the whole heart of the piece is that the moon landing, yeah, it's great and all, but you know what? Since there weren't any really women involved in Apollo, the sub-headline to this story is that the Apollo mission or the Apollo program was designed by men for men. So since women weren't really involved in it, it wasn't diverse, it wasn't inclusive, and therefore it's not as good as it could have been. And to be perfectly honest, there's a slight grain of truth in that. So I was doing just a little research on this, and I found out that there were the First Lady Astronaut Trainees, or called FLATs. They were a group of women who were never a part of NASA, but they were trained by Dr. Randy Lovelace. He's the man who created the Mercury space missions flying standards, right? And he was actually training this group of 12 women. And in the early 60s, there was serious talk that one or a few of these women were actually going to be incorporated into NASA. And Dr. Lovelace was actually of the opinion that women would make better astronauts than men. He cited, generally their cardiovascular health is better, they require less oxygen intake, and they don't weigh as much, which means that the equipment won't have to be as heavy, right? Because we won't have to, use it for, design it for men. But it was shot down. None of the FLATs were actually ever part of NASA. So there is a bit of truth to that, and the reason why they were never a part of NASA, Dr. Margaret Waitkamp, who is the curator of the Space History Department at the Air and Space Museum, she says that it was probably a combination of things. At the root, she argues that it was, in the early 60s, known in the US government took seriously the idea that a woman could be an astronaut, but there were other concerns too. The Soviets had just sent the first women into space, and the US didn't want to seem like they were in direct competition with the Soviets. Probably, I would say too, they didn't want to seem like they were, taking second place to the Soviets. And also, if anything happened to a woman astronaut at that time, especially in the parameters of the Cold War, that would have reflected very badly on NASA itself. So, a combination of reasons. But the first thing that just struck me about this story is that the New York Times is publicly saying that there are physical, biological differences between men and women. I mean, Dr. Cowell makes a big deal about, Dr. Lovelace wanting women instead of men to be astronauts, citing, physically they are much more appropriate to be astronauts than men. She cites Dr. Lovelace very appropriately, or very approvingly in that regard. She also says, for example, that the spacesuits, their cooling systems are designed to handle a man's sweat pattern, not a woman's sweat pattern. Or, she says, the rungs in the ladders of the shuttles, the distance between the rungs, it's for the average man, not for the average woman. She's listing all of these things as to why, the space program is unfriendly toward women. And when she does that, she is admitting that there are physical differences between men and women. This is a huge thing, especially in this day and age where we hear that sex is just a social construct, and especially with the transgender movement, which says, being a man doesn't mean that you have a male body, that you have male chromosomes, that you have male genitalia. The same thing about a woman. It's all about how you identify, all about how you feel subjectively. So the fact that the New York Times to actually argue that NASA is sexist by bringing up all of these bodily differences between men and women is a huge deal. And I'm also waiting for the transgender movement to just come forward and just tear this poor woman and her piece and the Times apart for this betrayal of their movement. But there's also something else about this, and this is a trend that I'm starting to see where great historical events or great historical achievements, right, in whatever field, literature, science, the arts, no matter how great they are, it's not good enough if they didn't meet our modern 21st century ideas of inclusiveness and diversity. We saw it here with her piece about the space race at NASA and the Apollo program. We saw it actually last week where the New York Times ran another piece saying that air conditioning, of all things, air conditioning is sexist. Why? Because temperatures in public places and in work environments are actually kept down so that men more often than not are comfortable, not women, which is why you will see women at work. Even if it's 1,000,000,000 degrees outside, you will see women wearing sweaters at their cubicle, okay? Air conditioning, an invention that hasn't just made our lives, more comfortable, some might say a little too comfortable, but an invention too that has actually saved lives, especially, in the hot summer that we are having this year. I think Europe is experiencing one of the hottest summers that they have had in a good long time. Air conditioning during summers like this actually save lives, especially for the very young, like infants, the very elderly, the infirm, the disabled, etc. People who are more susceptible to the heat exhaustion and heat stroke. But because air conditioning is used in the work environment, in a quote-unquote sexist way, air conditioning is bad. Same here with this New York Times piece about the space race. Because women were not involved in NASA and the Apollo program was made by men for men, there is a blemish on it. Forget about the great, scientific achievement of landing on the moon. Forget about all the knowledge and all the potential discovery that will benefit all of mankind because of that. All of mankind, including men and women. Because women weren't intimately involved in that process, it's wrong. And I'm sick and tired of this trend where we are trying to whittle down the past and all the accomplishments and all the good that the past has brought to us, simply because they are not operating under our ideas of diversity and inclusiveness. And people might laugh now, but I can so easily see a movement where where the entire point of the movement is that we have to ban air conditioning because it's sexist. We have to get rid of the space program, right? We can't even go to space anymore because everything, comes from those early NASA programs. And it was sexist. And so everything coming from that is going to carry that stain. And that is just going to, put a roadblock on all sorts of progress. Isn't it funny how the people who are always for progress, they call themselves progressives, are the ones who are going to inevitably stop progress because the roots of the progress that we have made are evil, according to their ideology, whether it's racism, sexism, homophobia, whatever. We obviously can't have those advancements. We obviously can't enjoy the fruits of the past because they're not ideologically pure. So again, very cult-like thinking there. And for our last story here on this week's Rolling Stone, we have to go to the University of California, Santa Barbara, where a PhD candidate, a woman named Laura Tanner, is receiving a huge amount of backlash for the crime of being transphobic. Now, just as a little bit of background, Laura Tanner, like I said, she's a PhD student in feminist studies, no less, She is she's getting her PhD in feminist studies, So, hardcore feminist. She is also an ally of the LGBT community because she's been an assistant teacher for LGBTQIA plus introductory classes there at the university. However, she is now being made into the biggest enemy she's basically being made into Donald Trump's sister because a few students went on her Twitter page and they found quote-unquote transphobic tweets. And then these students actually had the gall to make them public, which is what has started this whole outrage. Now, what are some of these horrible transphobic tweets that she was putting up on Twitter? Well, here are some of them. On June 20th, Laura Tanner tweeted, "People who think they are transgender exist. No debate. There is no such thing as actually being transgender, a male woman or a female man. Believing so is a delusion. I will not validate such a decision by validating terms like trans people. Interpret that as you will." On May 5th, she tweeted, "Yay, like woman, female, man, and male? These words all have original definitions based on reality. Transsexualism started this mess by trying to change man, woman to include people of the opposite sex and fantasizing that drugs and cutting change one's sex in the first place." On March 28th, she tweeted, "Calling males women or females men is the very definition of misgendering. I feel deeply disrespected by the notion that any male can call themselves a woman and be considered the same gender as me." Now, because of that, I mean, she has, and when I mean backlash, I mean severe backlash. So students were actually tweeting, calling her absolute trash, saying that she's a dumb bee, saying that she's a gatekeeper of womanhood, as if, Laura Tanner is deciding who can and cannot be a woman, as if, nature doesn't have anything to do with it. One student actually directly threatened her on Twitter, and he put out on the platform, "That bee needs to die." And of course, her colleagues in the feminist department really aren't doing anything at all to back her up. So, let's see. An open letter from graduate students who are also in the feminist department. Part of their letter said this: "As part of feminist studies, we are committed to cultivating intersectional, student-centered learning and community environments. To the students who have been harmed by transphobia and anti-sex worker rhetoric in our department, we are so sorry." And of course, the argument is going that she has created an unsafe environment for trans students and genderqueer people on campus simply because she was telling the truth. A man can't become a woman and a woman can't become a man. And because of this, she is going to be blacklisted. This woman, Laura Tanner, very likely may not have a career in academia, okay? Because all of the universities and colleges that have feminist departments, what she's getting her PhD in, they are also going to be controlled by the most woke people there are. So when other universities, other colleges see what is happening here, see what she has been tweeted, see the reaction that has met the publication of these tweets, they aren't going to touch her with a 20-foot pole. So I don't even know how this woman is going to get a job once she graduates, okay? So her career has probably been destroyed. And even more interesting and a bit more foreboding even is this quote, okay, by Karamina Youssef, okay? She is a second-year UCSB student. She is one of the students who actually originally saw these tweets on Tanner's Twitter feed and published them. And Youssef said this, okay, "Tanner's speech is protected by her First Amendment on Twitter, but the students are also showing our First Amendment rights on campus by advocating for our community here and spreading awareness." Okay? And what that means is that, yes, you definitely have the right to say these things, but there are going to be consequences for you saying those sort of things. And usually, yeah, I'm all for that. You know what? Say what you want and take the consequences. But here, it's a little different because this is obviously being used as a blackmail. Because when something that does not, incite violence against trans people or genderqueer people, when the tweet simply says that a man can't become a woman and a woman can't become a man. We're not saying burn the trans people. We're not saying that trans people are evil. We're not saying that they're predators. We're not saying that they should all die or anything. Just a man can't become a woman and a woman can't become a man. What 15 years ago would have been the common sense. When that is interpreted as violence, and then when that is used as an excuse to basically destroy a person's life and a person's career, the message at the end of the day is that you may have the right to speak, but if you do speak out, you are going to be punished. Not only that, I believe that Tanner is a single mom of 2 kids. what's going to happen to her 2 kids? Are her 2 kids going to be threatened, as we've seen before? So there we have it. If you have a family, if you have any sort of relation who is, alive and well, if you have friends, are they going to be doxxed? Are they going to be threatened if you don't shut up, or if you continue to speak the truth, or what you are arguing to be the truth? Is that what's going to happen? You see very clearly here, they're not going to try to erase the First Amendment. They are just going to make it so damned hellish for you to actually use the First Amendment that it's not going to be worth it. And a lot of people would much rather just stay quiet instead of actually going through the hell that Laura Tanner and other people like her are going to go through and have gone through before. But anyway, we're running a bit long this week, gang. Surprise, surprise. So, hope you enjoyed. Everyone, have a great weekend. Stay cool if you can. And I will see you all on Tuesday. Ciao.